There's something about the ones who wear a badge. They're trained to stay calm, trained to assess, to report, to deal in facts. They walk into situations most people walk away from, and they write it all down in neat official language that strips out the fear and leaves only the sequence of events. But sometimes the sequence of events doesn't make sense. Sometimes the address doesn't exist. Sometimes the house has been empty for months, but the lamp is still warm. Sometimes you're standing in a stairwell in the dark, and something touches the back of your neck, and when the light comes back on, there is nothing there. And you write that down too, in the same neat official language, and you file it and you try to forget it. Tonight's stories come from the ones who couldn't forget. A cop who made a friend he wasn't supposed to keep. A rookie who spent one night inside a building that had no interest in letting him leave unchanged. And an officer alone on the third shift who answered a call from a number that shouldn't exist at an address that hasn't been on any map for decades. These are their accounts. First person, unresolved. Welcome to Mr. Bones' Midnight Society, Episode 17. Now, let the nightmares begin. The call came in at 11:14 on a Wednesday night in early March. My shift had already been long, a fender bender on Route 9 that turned into a 3-hour ordeal when one of the drivers turned out to have a suspended license. A noise complaint out by the university that was exactly what it sounded like. The kind of paperwork that follows both and never gets shorter, no matter how fast you write. I was running on my third cup of gas station coffee and a granola bar I'd found wedged under the passenger seat, and I was maybe 20 minutes from clocking out when dispatch flagged it. Priority: elderly female, possible intruder, 4417 Dunmore Street. I knew Dunmore. Quiet residential, older homes on small lots, the kind of street that goes to sleep early and stays that way. Not the sort of place you expected trouble, but I'd been doing this job long enough to know that trouble doesn't check the neighborhood before it arrives. I pulled in with my lights off, standard for a possible intruder situation. No reason to announce yourself before you know what you're walking into. The house was a narrow 2-story white siding, gone slightly gray with age, a front porch with a wooden railing that had been painted over so many times it had lost its original shape at the corners. The lights were on inside. Living room, from the spread of the glow behind the curtains. A television flickering somewhere deeper in the house. The kind of pale blue light it throws when the sound is low. I did a slow walk around the perimeter first. Side gate. Latched. No sign it had been forced. Back door solid. No damage to the frame. Windows intact on both sides. Whatever had frightened the caller, there was no obvious point of entry from the outside. I went back to the front and knocked. She answered faster than I expected, like she'd been standing just on the other side of the door, waiting and listening for footsteps on the porch. She was small, the kind of small that comes with age, that slow compression of the body over many decades. White hair pinned back with 2 tortoiseshell clips, a pale blue cardigan buttoned unevenly over a floral nightgown, like she'd dressed quickly in the dark. She was holding a cordless phone against her chest with both hands, and her eyes, dark brown, very sharp, nothing clouded about them, went straight to my badge and then up to my face. "Oh, thank goodness," she said. And then she stepped aside without hesitation to let me in. Her name was Maren Holst, 75 years old, widowed 11 years. She told me she'd heard someone trying the back door. 3 slow attempts on the handle, she said, each one spaced apart like whoever it was had stopped between each try to listen for movement inside the house. She'd been awake because she rarely slept well anymore, and the house at night was a place she knew, the way you know something you've lived alongside for a very long time. Every creak of the settling foundation, the particular rattle of the furnace kicking on in the cold, the way the wind hit the side windows differently than the back ones. What she'd heard that night was none of those things, and she knew it. I checked the back door again from the inside. No scratches on the lock, no damage anywhere on the frame. It could have been the wind on a loose latch, could have been an animal. Raccoons work older hardware sometimes with a persistence that surprises people. Could have been something else. I told her the honest version. I couldn't confirm a deliberate attempt, but I documented it and she should call again immediately if she heard anything more. She nodded and thanked me. Then she asked if I wanted coffee. I should have said no. I had reports waiting back at the station and my wife was already asleep, and I was tired in the specific way of a long shift that ran past its natural end. But something about the way she stood there, so composed, so careful about not appearing frightened now that help had arrived, and underneath all of that so unmistakably alone in this quiet house, made me say yes without really deciding to. We sat at her kitchen table for nearly 40 minutes. She told me about her husband Harold, a plumber who had built the back porch with his own 2 hands in the summer of 1987 and been prouder of it than anything he'd ever been paid to build in his professional life. She showed me the ceramic mug collection arranged on the shelf above the sink, one from every place she and Harold had ever traveled together. Copenhagen, where they went for their 30th anniversary. Quebec City in the fall. A small bed and breakfast somewhere in the Smokies, whose name she couldn't quite pull up anymore, but whose front porch she said she could still see perfectly if she closed her eyes. I told her about my mother, who collected refrigerator magnets the same way. Same impulse, different object. Maren laughed at that. A real laugh, not the polite kind people use when they feel obligated. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the front door and said, "I'm sorry for keeping you." "You didn't," I said. And I meant it completely. I drove back toward the station with the window cracked and thought about her standing in that doorway. The house warm and lit behind her. The phone still held against her chest like she hadn't quite committed to putting it down. The following Thursday, I was in the area around 7 in the evening, and I turned onto Dunmore on an impulse I didn't examine too closely. One follow-up after a reported disturbance, I told myself. Professional due diligence. I knocked. She answered with a dish towel over her shoulder and something on the stove that smelled like butter and garlic and some herb I couldn't identify. "Officer Reyes," she said. The smile was already there before I could say anything. That was how it started. Every Thursday evening after that, I stopped by Dunmore Street on my way in or out of a shift. It folded into my routine the way certain things do. Quietly, without announcement, until one day you realize you'd feel the absence of it the way you feel a missing step in the dark. We'd sit at her kitchen table. She made coffee in the cooler months and lemonade once summer arrived. She told me things about Harold and his porch, about her daughter Elena out in Portland, who called every Sunday without ever missing one, about the neighborhood as it had been 20 years ago when there were children on the street every evening until dark, and old Mr. Faruta at the corner had a rose garden that made people slow down when they walked past. She remembered everything I told her, That was one of the things about Marin. She held on to the details of other people's lives with a care that some people only give their own. I'd mentioned once in passing that my daughter had a dance recital coming up, and 3 weeks later, before I'd even sat down, she asked how it had gone. When I told her about a bad call I'd had, a highway accident, the kind that stays with you in the days after whether you want it to or not, she didn't try to reframe it or find the bright side, or tell me that at least I'd done everything right. She just sat with it alongside me for a moment, quietly and without fuss, before she moved us somewhere easier. That is a particular kind of grace, and not everyone knows how to do it. The months passed the way they do when something good is happening, and you're not quite tracking the time. Spring came, and she started seeds on the back windowsill in small plastic trays and consulted me on the progress, like I had opinions about seedlings, which I did not. But I listened. Summer arrived, and we moved to Harold's porch in the long evening light, and she told me the names of every bird that visited her feeder with the expectation that I would remember them. I didn't, but I liked the way she said them. She kept a pot of African violets on the kitchen windowsill and gave me weekly updates on it with the seriousness of a scientist reporting on a long-term study. In July, she made lemonade with actual lemons and fresh mint from the pot on the back step, and it was genuinely the best thing I'd had all summer. I told her so, and she waved it off, but she made it again the following week. "You didn't have to keep coming," she said one evening in late August. We were on the back porch. The light was going amber, and the fireflies were just starting to show in the yard. "I know," I said. She looked out at the yard for a long moment. Then she nodded once, slowly, like something had been quietly settled between us. I came the first Thursday in October, and she had a small orange pumpkin on the front steps, and the African violets had been moved back inside for the season. The second Thursday, she had made apple cake, which she said was strictly an autumn thing, a rule she kept without exception. I ate 2 slices, and she sent the rest home with me wrapped tightly in foil with my name written on top in her small, deliberate handwriting, as if I might forget whose it was. The third Thursday in October, I turned onto Dunmore Street and knew something was wrong before I could have told you why. The house was dark. Not dark the way a house gets when someone's moved to another room. Dark the way a house goes when it has been sitting empty for a long time. A particular quality of stillness behind the windows, an absence that has settled into the walls. The porch light was off. The curtains hung flat and lightless. The pumpkin was gone from the front steps. I sat in the car and looked at it and tried to put together a reasonable explanation and kept coming up short. The African violets were not in the window. I got out slowly. The front path felt wrong under my feet in a way I couldn't articulate. I knocked and got nothing. Called her name and got nothing. I went around the side. The gate was unlatched. The back porch Harold had built was filmed with grime and covered in leaves that had been sitting long enough to start decomposing at the edges. I shone my flashlight through the kitchen window. Dust. A fine gray layer across every surface. The dish rack empty and coated. The ceramic mugs on the shelf dull with it. Copenhagen, Quebec City, the Smokies, all of them. The African violet pot still on the sill with the plant collapsed inward, bone dry, dead for a long time. The blue ceramic mug she always used sitting on the counter with a dark ring of residue at the bottom where the last drink had evaporated and no one had ever wiped it clean. This was not a week. This was months. I went back around front. A woman had stopped on the sidewalk with a small dog on a leash. She was watching me with her arms folded. I showed her my badge. "Do you know the resident here, Maren Holst?" Something moved through her expression. "Maren passed," she said quietly. "Late March, I think it was." "What happened?" She looked at the house. Someone broke in during the night. The shock of it, her heart. She was alone when it happened. They didn't find her for 2 days. She paused. The man who did it was never caught. The case went quiet after a few months. I stood on that sidewalk for a long time after she walked on. Late March. The break-in was late March. The call that had first brought me to her door, the night she heard someone testing the back handle, slow and deliberate, once and again and once more, had been the first week of March. Whoever came back for her had already been there once before, had already stood at that door, had already listened for movement inside and decided to come back when they were more certain she was alone. And Maren had known. Not as a fact she could have spoken aloud. In the way you know a sound in a house you have lived in for 41 years, in your body, before your mind has finished forming the thought. She had picked up that phone and called, and I had come, and I had checked the door and found nothing and told her it was most likely nothing. And I had sat at her table and drunk her coffee and let myself believe that showing up had been the same as keeping her safe. I drove to the station and pulled her file the moment I walked in, read every report, wrote down everything I knew. The first call, the date, the exact description she had given me of what she'd heard, the deliberate spacing of the attempts. I submitted it to the detective assigned to her case and requested formally that it be reconsidered alongside the prior incident, that the two things be looked at as one. He told me he'd look at it. I followed up the next week, and the week after that. I'm still following up. Every month I check in on that case. I've flagged it twice for re-review. I've connected it to 2 similar incidents reported in the same area that same spring that no one had thought to link together. I've kept her file from going to the back of any drawer. It is slow work. It is frustrating work. But slow is not the same thing as finished, and frustrating is not the same thing as impossible. Maren Holst was 75 years old. She lived alone in a house she had shared with the man she loved for decades. She kept mugs from everywhere they had traveled and African violets on the windowsill and made apple cake in October because it was a rule, and she sat quietly with people in their hard moments without trying to fix what she knew couldn't be fixed. She called for help the night she heard someone at her door. I came, and then I left and told myself it was probably nothing. I don't get to take that back, but I can make sure her case doesn't go quiet again. Whoever did this is still out there, and I intend to make sure that doesn't last forever. I was 23 years old the night they sent me to Hargrove, fresh out of the academy. Badge still had that factory shine to it that veterans could spot from across a parking lot. My supervisor, Sergeant Briggs, handed me the assignment on a Thursday afternoon like he was passing me a sandwich wrapper, casual, barely looking up from his desk. Overnight patrol, Hargrove Psychiatric. They need a body out there until the property transfer goes through next month. You're it. I knew about Hargrove. Everybody in town knew about Hargrove. It had been all over the local news the previous spring. The facility had been seized by the federal government after investigators discovered that someone on the inside had been using the hospital morgue to move narcotics. Bodies arriving from other counties, drug packages sewn inside. Nobody knew yet how long it had been going on or how many people had been involved. The facility director had been arrested. Several staff members were under investigation. The place had been shut down in April. Patients transferred to other institutions, and it had been sitting empty ever since under federal seal. Briggs told me the assignment was simple. One officer, overnight, make sure nobody broke in or vandalized the property. Walk the perimeter every hour. Log your rounds. Don't go past the ground floor unless you have a specific reason. It's just a building, he said. I nodded and told him yes, sir, and didn't say what I was thinking. I showed up at Hargrove at 10 o'clock on a Friday night in October of 1983. The facility sat back from the road behind a long asphalt drive lined with oak trees that had gone skeletal for the season. In the headlights, they looked like arms reaching over the car. The building itself was 4 stories of yellowed brick with narrow windows and a flat roof, in the general architectural philosophy of something designed to keep people in rather than make them comfortable. A chain-link fence ran the perimeter with federal seizure notices posted every 30 feet. The previous officer had left a key in a lockbox by the main entrance and a handwritten note taped to the inside of the door that said, "Flashlight batteries are fresh. Log sheet on the desk. Good luck." That last part gave me pause. Good luck is not something you write on a note for someone doing a routine building watch. Inside smelled like industrial cleaner and something underneath it I couldn't name. Something older and damper that the cleaner hadn't quite reached. The entrance hall was wide and low-ceilinged. The floors that particular shade of green linoleum you only ever see in institutions. The overhead lights were on a reduced circuit. Every third fixture lit, the ones between them dark, so the hallway went light, shadow, light, shadow all the way down to the nurse's station at the far end. I set my jacket down on the desk, signed the log, and checked my flashlight. Solid beam. Good. The first perimeter walk was uneventful. I went room by room on the ground floor. Intake rooms. A common area with chairs still arranged in a circle. An office with filing cabinet drawers hanging open like someone had left in a hurry. Everything was still. The only sounds were my own footsteps and the occasional moan of the building settling in the October cold. I was back at the desk by 11, poured coffee from my thermos, and told myself this was going to be a long but entirely boring night. At 11:47, the intercom crackled. I sat up straight. The intercom system, a panel of room buttons on the wall behind the nurse's station, was supposed to be disconnected. I had been told specifically that the internal systems were powered down. I stared at the panel. The small red indicator light on Unit 7 was lit. I stood up slowly, pressed the response button. Hello? Static. And then, underneath it, faint and shapeless, something that might have been breathing, or might have been the hiss of old wiring. I held the button for 10 more seconds. Nothing else came through. The indicator light went dark. I wrote it in the log. Electrical anomaly. Intercom Unit 7-2347. Unconfirmed. I wrote it down because writing things down is what you do when you don't know what else to do. At 12:30, I did my second perimeter walk. Ground floor, same route. I was passing the common area when my flashlight caught something that stopped me cold. The chairs. They had been arranged in a circle when I checked the room an hour and a half ago. I was certain of it. I noted it specifically, that institutional arrangement, the way the seats all faced inward, like a group session that had been interrupted mid-meeting. Now they were all facing the door. Every single one of them aimed directly at the doorway where I was standing. I stood there for a long moment and did not move and did not breathe, and told myself there was an explanation. A draft from somewhere. An uneven floor. The building settling. I counted the chairs. 7. The same 7 that had been there before. I stepped into the room and looked at each one, and there was nothing to see. Just old institutional chairs with cracked vinyl seats and metal legs, sitting on a linoleum floor that was perfectly level. I left the room and kept walking and did not look back. At 1:15, I heard footsteps on the floor above me. I stopped in the middle of the hallway and stood completely still and listened. They were slow and deliberate. Heel, pause. Heel, pause. Moving from what sounded like directly above the nurse's station toward the east end of the building. Then, they stopped. I had been told not to go past the ground floor without a specific reason. I decided footsteps counted. The stairwell door was heavy and swung inward on a hinge that needed oil badly. It let out a long groan that echoed up the shaft. I caught it before it swung back and eased it shut behind me. Stood at the bottom of the stairs and listened. Nothing above. I started up. The second floor was darker than the ground level. The reduced circuit didn't extend up here, and the only light came from my flashlight and the faint orange bleed of the parking lot lights through the narrow windows. Patient rooms lined both sides of the hallway, their doors standing open. My beam swept across each one as I passed. Empty beds with bare mattresses, bedside tables with nothing on them, the occasional personal item left behind, a paper cup, a television guide from 1982, a single slipper sitting in the middle of a room as if its owner had stepped out of it and simply kept walking. Halfway down the hall, I stopped. One of the doors was closed. Every other door on the floor was open. I had checked the hallway from the top of the stairs, and I had counted the open doors, and there had been nothing closed. But here, room 214, the door was shut. I put my hand on the handle. Cold. Colder than the metal of every other door I'd touched that night. I told myself it was the room's exposure, the position of the window. I pushed it open. The room was empty. Bare mattress, bare table, window closed. But on the mattress, in the dust that had accumulated over months of vacancy, there was a shape. The impression of something that had been lying there. A long oval depression in the fine gray layer of settled dust. The outline of a body that had been on that mattress recently enough that the dust had not yet resettled over it. I backed out of the room. I pulled the door shut. I went back to the stairwell. At the top of the stairs, just before I pushed through the door, my flashlight went out. Complete darkness. I stopped moving. I could hear my own pulse. I clicked the flashlight off and on twice. Nothing. Both times. Tapped it against my palm the way you do. Nothing. I stood in the stairwell in total darkness and breathed and told myself that the batteries were fine. I had checked them. This was a malfunction. This was a simple mechanical failure. Something touched the back of my neck. Not wind. Not a draft from the stairwell shaft. Something deliberate and light. The way you'd lay 2 fingers against someone's skin to get their attention. I spun around. Flashlight on. It came on immediately, full beam, no flicker, and lit the stairwell behind me. Empty. The stairs going up to the 3rd floor. The railing, the concrete walls. Nothing. I went back down to the ground floor, and I sat at the nurse's station desk, and I did not move from that chair again until the sun was coming through the front windows and I could hear birds outside, and the world had become, once again, something I recognized. I logged everything: the intercom, the chairs, the footsteps, room 214, the flashlight. All of it in the neat shorthand of an official report, stripped of the way my hands had been shaking when I wrote it. I drove straight to the precinct when my relief showed up at 6. Briggs was already at his desk. He looked up when I came in, and whatever he saw in my face made him set his coffee down. "How is Hargrove?" "Sir," I said, "I need to request a reassignment." He studied me for a moment. "What happened?" I told him. All of it. I kept my voice level and my account factual, and I did not editorialize or speculate. I told him what I had seen and what I had heard, and what I had felt on the back of my neck in that stairwell. When I finished, Briggs was quiet for a long moment. "You checked the upper floors for intruders?" "Yes, sir. Ground and second. Nothing." Another silence. "The intercom's been doing that for weeks," he said finally. "Previous officers mentioned it." "And the chairs?" He didn't answer that one. "Sir," I said again, "I am formally requesting not to be assigned to Hargrove again." Briggs picked up his coffee, looked at it, set it back down. "Granted," he said. Just the one word, like he'd been expecting it. Later I found out that I was the 4th officer in 6 weeks to make that same request. That Hargrove had gone through rotating overnight assignments since April because nobody stayed past 2 or 3 nights. That one officer, a 15-year veteran who didn't rattle easily, had submitted his report and then taken 3 days of personal leave and never explained why. The property transfer went through in December. A development company acquired it, announced plans to convert it into apartments. Construction crews went in the following spring. They quit after 2 weeks. I heard it from someone who knew someone on the crew. No official statement, no explanation on record. The project was abandoned. Hargrove is still standing. I drove past it once, years later. The federal notices on the fence had faded to near white. The oak trees along the drive had grown in thicker. The building looked exactly the same. 4 stories of yellowed brick, narrow windows, flat roof. 1 light on in a 2nd floor window. I didn't stop to count which room. The overnight shift at Caldwell PD was called the 3rd shift by everyone who worked it, and nobody wanted it. It ran from 11 at night to 7 in the morning, and it was, by department consensus, the loneliest 8 hours in law enforcement. Caldwell was a small town. 1,400 people, 1 traffic light, a diner that closed at 9, and a gas station that closed at 10. By midnight, the streets were empty. By 1 in the morning, you could drive the entire town grid without seeing another moving vehicle. The radio stayed quiet for hours at a stretch. Some officers called it peaceful. The ones who'd done it more than twice stopped using that word. I was 26 and had been on the force for 4 months when Sergeant Dolan assigned me my first solo 3rd shift. 2 officers had called out sick on the same night. Bad luck or bad planning, Dolan said, and either way it wasn't his problem. And I was the next name on the roster. "Quiet night," Dolan said, already pulling on his jacket. "Log your check-ins every hour on the hour. Dispatch will route anything that comes in automatically. There's coffee in the back room. It's been sitting since this morning, so I take no responsibility for it." He was out the door by 11:15. The station settled around me like it had been waiting for the last person to leave. Alone was a very specific feeling in that building. Not just quiet, compressed somehow, like the rooms were a size too small for the silence inside them. I did my first check-in at midnight. walked the perimeter of the parking lot, came back inside and poured the stale coffee into the least stained mug I could find. Settled in at the dispatch desk with my log sheet and the laminated town map pinned to the corkboard on the wall beside me. Nothing came in at midnight. Nothing at 1. At 1:40, a woman on Pemberton Road called to report a loose dog in her yard. I drove out, spent 15 minutes talking a basset hound out from under a porch, and returned it to an elderly man 2 houses down who answered the door in a bathrobe and apologized 4 times. Back at the station by 2:15. The coffee was worse on the second cup. I was finishing the dog report when the dispatch line rang at 3:04 in the morning. I picked up. Standard greeting, department name, officer on duty. Static, long and heavy, the kind that has texture to it. Then, underneath it, a voice, low and unhurried in the way of someone who has been awake for a very long time and has moved past, tired, into something else. "There's someone outside my house," the voice said. "They've been standing in the yard for over an hour." "I can help you with that, sir. Can I get your address?" 11 Silas Road, he said. I turned to the map. We still used paper maps in those days. A large laminated grid of Caldwell and the surrounding 2 miles, pinned flat to the corkboard, updated every few years when the county issued new prints. I ran my finger down the road index along the bottom margin. S section, Sawmill, Shepherd, Somerset. No Silas Road. I checked the overflow index that covered the county routes just outside town limits. Nothing. No Silas Road anywhere in the system. "Sir, I'm having some trouble locating that address. Can you describe your surroundings for me? Nearest cross street? Any landmarks nearby?" A pause. Brief. Like he'd expected the question. "The old mill is at the end of the road," he said. "You'll see the water tower when you turn in." I knew the mill. Everyone in Caldwell knew the mill. It sat at the eastern edge of town where the creek came through, decommissioned since the early 60s, its wheel long rotted out. I knew the water tower beside it too. I had driven past both a dozen times since starting at the department. But the road that ran out to the mill was Eckert Lane. That was what the map said. That was what the signs said. "Is it possible you're on Eckert Lane, sir? The road that runs past the mill?" A longer pause this time. "Silas Road," he said again. Calm, certain, like a man reading a detail from a document he was holding. "Please hurry." The line went dead. I sat with the receiver in my hand and looked at the map. Then I logged the call. Time. Number. Address is given, location unverifiable, and drove out toward the mill. Eckert Lane was empty when I arrived. The mill sat dark at the end of it, the water tower rising beside it against a sky gone fully overcast, no moon showing, no stars. I idled the cruiser at the lane's entrance and swept my spotlight down the full length of it. Overgrown grass on both shoulders. An old utility shed with a roof that had given up. The creek running dark through the trees to the south. No houses. There had never been houses on Eckert Lane. It was a service road to the mill and nothing more. I drove it anyway, all the way to the mill fence and back, spotlight covering both sides the entire way. Then I sat at the entrance for a few minutes and listened to the engine idle and the creek and nothing else. Back at the station by 3:38. At 3:51, the line rang again. Same voice, same unhurried tone, but something underneath it now that hadn't been there before, a flatness, like a man describing something he'd already accepted. "They're closer," he said. "They're at the edge of the porch steps." "Sir, I drove out to the area near the mill and I was not able to locate your address. I need you to help me find you. Is there anyone else in the house who could—" 11 Silas Road. The same way he'd said it before, reading it. "Sir, is there anyone with you right now?" A pause. "There used to be someone with me," he said. The past tense hit me somewhere specific. I straightened in my chair. "Sir, are you in immediate danger?" "They're on the steps," he said, "the top step now. I need you to stay on the line and move away from the front of the house. Go to a back room, lock the door. The back door doesn't lock properly," he said quietly. "It never did. I always meant to fix it." "Sir," the line went dead again. I called County Dispatch immediately and asked them to run a full search on 11 Silas Road. County database, historical records, anything they had. The county dispatcher came back in under 2 minutes. "No record of a Silas Road in the county system," she said. "No current listing, no historical street listing." "Can you trace the number that's been routing to me?" Longer pause. Keyboard sounds, more of them than I expected. "The number routing to your station," she said, and her voice had changed slightly. "Carefully neutral in the way of someone choosing not to editorialize, is flagged in our system as unassigned. No active account, no inactive account, no subscriber record at all." Another pause. "It shouldn't be capable of making outbound calls." I wrote every word of that down. My handwriting had gotten smaller, the way it does when I'm concentrating on keeping it steady. At 4:19, the line rang a third time. I picked up before it finished the first ring. The static was different now. Heavier, layered, like signals competing. "He's inside," the voice said. "Sir." He came through the back. I heard the door. Still that patient, quiet tone. Still no panic. That was the part that sat wrong with me. A man describing an intruder in his house with the composure of someone reporting yesterday's weather. "Get out of the house right now. Go to a neighbor. Go to the road." "There are no neighbors on Silas Road," he said. "There's only the one house. There's only ever been the one house." "What is your name, sir?" "Tell me your name." Silence. Long enough that I thought the line had dropped again. "Raymond," he said finally. His voice had shifted. Quieter. Turned slightly away from the receiver, like he was listening to something else in the room. "Raymond, call." "Raymond, I need you to move right now. Get to a window, call out." "He's in the hallway," Raymond said. Not to me anymore. Not quite to anyone. I can hear him on the floorboards. He walks heavy. He always walked heavy. The static surged hard. I pulled the receiver back from my ear. "Raymond." "I should have called sooner," he said. Soft, almost to himself. "I should have called a long time ago." The line went dead. I tried to call back. The number did not connect. I sat at that desk until pale gray light started showing in the front windows and I could hear birds in the lot outside. When Dolan came in at 7, I had the full log typed out and sitting on his desk. He read it standing up, coat still on. I watched his face go through something I couldn't entirely read. He read it a second time. Then he set it down. "Raymond Cull," he said. "You know the name." He pulled out his chair and sat down slowly. "Raymond Cull lived on the east side of town. The road's been gone since the early 50s. County decommissioned it when the mill closed and the last families moved out. Pulled the signs, removed it from the maps, but the old-timers always called it Silas Road. He looked at the log sheet. Raymond died in that house. 1961. Someone broke in during the night, came through the back door. Case went cold. Nobody was ever charged. The room was very quiet. The number that called in, I said. County confirmed it's unassigned. Said it shouldn't be able to make outbound calls. Dolan nodded. Not surprised, not unsurprised, something in between. This isn't the first time this has happened, I said. He shook his head. Third shift gets a call like this every few years. Not always the same, but always that address. Always that name. He picked up the log. I'll file it. File it where? He looked at me steadily. With the others, he said. I drove home and slept for most of the day. When I woke up, the light in my room was late afternoon orange, and for a moment, I didn't know where I was or what time it was or which end of the day I was in. Then I remembered Raymond Cull saying I should have called sooner, and the way his voice had turned from the phone at the end, like he was listening to footsteps in the hall. And I lay there in the orange light and thought about a man in a house on a road that no longer existed, calling a number that shouldn't work, reaching a station that couldn't find him. He had finally gotten through. After 60 years, he had finally gotten through. And there was nothing, not one single thing, that anyone could do about it now. 3 officers. 3 nights they can't take back. What strikes me about these accounts isn't the strangeness of what they witnessed. It's the aftermath. The drive home in silence. The report filed in neat official language. The request for reassignment submitted the next morning with shaking hands. The case that stays open, not because the system demands it, but because one man refuses to let a woman be forgotten. They were trained to deal in facts, and the facts in each of these cases did not cooperate. Some things don't resolve. Some addresses stay off the map. Some buildings hold on to what happened inside them long after the lights go out and the signs come down. And some people, the ones who go looking, the ones who answer the phone at 3 a.m, the ones who keep showing up on Thursday evenings just to check, some of them carry what they found for the rest of their lives. That's what tonight was about. The ones who couldn't look away. Thank you for spending this hour in the dark with me, Midnight members. Good night, Midnight members. Sleep well, if you can.